Hey folks, it's been a while since we've done a video, and I thought I might create one that could give you maybe a little bit of direction with the shapes project that you've been working on. All right, so what I'm doing here is I've created the framework, or I have the framework that you guys were provided, and I just thought I'd go over the architecture here a little bit at the beginning. You'll see that we have the shape class, which is abstract, meaning that it must have at least one abstract method inside of it. You'll see that I did convert um, all of the private variables to be protected so that the children can access them. If you don't wish to do this, if you don't wish to have the children access them directly at the in the child class, then you could go ahead and use the accessor and mutator methods, as I did in the constructor here. There's a default shape constructor, which really doesn't do much of anything. And then there's a shape overloaded constructor, which takes a beginning point, x1 and y1, and an endpoint, x2 and y2, as well as the color of the object. All right, and you can see that I'm setting those using the the mutator methods. Then I define my mutator methods down below. And the more important method in this class is the draw method. The draw method is a method that must be implemented in the child classes, and it takes a graphics object. A graphics object is purely just the pen. Think of it as the pen that you're using in order to draw on the screen. Okay. The next class is a line class. The line class is going to extend the shape class, meaning that it's going to inherit from it. Its default constructor calls its parents or shapes default constructor. The overloaded constructor takes in all of the values for a line, the beginning point x1, y1, the end point x2, y2, and the color of the line. And it passes all of that information on to the parent. The draw method, which must be implemented since this is a child of shape and it's the first concrete class, sets the color of the line that we're going to draw, and then it just calls the draw line method, which I just used x1, y1, x2, y2. Again, if you didn't change these to be protected in the shape class, then you're going to have to use the set x1, set y1, set x2, set y2 values. Okay? Kind of like what I did with the set color method here. I just wanted to give you an example of using both. Now, the drawing is actually taking place inside of the draw panel class. The draw panel class is going to extend JPanel, and what I did was I declared an array list of shapes and instantiated it down here below. Actually, I guess I instantiated it there, which was unnecessary. I instantiated it down here below, and I gave it an initial value of 10. I thought, 10 would be a good, reasonable amount to start off with. I created an enumeration to represent the line, the oval, and the rectangle, and created a variable called shapeType, which determines which object is actually selected. In this particular project or example that I'm showing you right here, the only one that I've actually implemented is line. I have a shape object called current shape, the current color of the object, whether or not the object is filled, and something called the status label, which is ultimately going to be something that I'm going to want to pass into the panel. The status label, remember, is supposed to just show the X and Y positions of where the mouse is. Okay? So that when I run this now, you'll see that I have a frame. Remember, J-frames have a default layout of a border layout. I have a panel up top, which has a bunch of buttons on it. And then I have my canvas, which is a J panel. And I can then draw my lines all over the screen, as many as I want, since I have an array list. Okay, in my default constructor for my panel, I set the shape type initially to be line because that's the first one that's listed in the combo box. I tell it not to be filled, and I set variable current shape to be null. You'll see that this gets created as soon as we start drawing an object. I set the background color for my J panel to be white so that I can see what I'm drawing on it. And I instantiate a couple of mouse handlers, or a mouse handler, I guess I should say. The mouse handler is a private class inside of the draw panel class. You could make it a separate class if that's something that you're more interested or accustomed to doing. The mouse handler class, a class that I created, extends mouse adapter and implements mouse motion listener. What does that mean? That means I have mouse pressed events, I have a mouse released event, I have a mouse dragged event, and I have a mouse moved event. Okay? Before I jump into those, let me go back up to one more method up top here. All right, so I add the mouse listener and the mouse motion listener so that I can have both of these objects. The panel is actually doing the listening for the mouse. There's no component, it's the panel who's actually doing the listening. All right, I could just as easily have said this dot. And that would have said, okay, I need this panel to have a mouse listener and a mouse motion listener. The paint component method is a method that is defined in the JPanel class. Since my draw panel class extends JPanel, the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to paint the component. I want to call my parent. So I'm overriding my paint component method of the JPanel class, which does nothing. So I tell the paint component to do whatever it needs to do in its parent class. And then I go through my array list and I say, okay, whatever object you are, call your specific draw method. Now this is important because this is polymorphism, right? My array list, as I declared it up above, is an array list of shapes. Because each type of object has its own draw method, a line has a draw line method, an oval is going to have a draw oval method, or draw oval method call. Draw rectangle is going to have a draw rectangle call, etc. This idea of creating an array list of shapes allows me to use polymorphism because each individual object will be instantiated, or each child will be instantiated specifically. What this next line allows me to do is draw the shape as it's occurring. So for example, when I draw the line in this case, you can see that it's being drawn as I'm moving the mouse across the screen. If I were to comment this out and run it again, then you would see that the line would only appear after I release the mouse. All right, I typically like to see what I'm drawing as I'm drawing it, so I'm going to leave that inside there. I have some mutator methods to set the shape type, the shape color, and whether or not it's filled. I have a method here to clear the last shape, which obviously is not implemented yet. But all I need to do that is to remove the last element out of the array list. If I want to clear the drawing, I need to remove all of the objects from the array list. All right, when I press the mouse, the first thing that I figure out is it a line, is it an oval, or is it a rectangle? If it's a line, then I'm going to instantiate my current shape object to be a new line, and I'm going to get the X position from the event that's passed in. Remember, the mouse pressed says it passes in an event, a mouse event, called event in this case, and I could get the X position, the Y position, and the X position, and I'm just setting the X position and the Y position for the second point to be wherever I clicked. All right, what is that going to allow me to do? That would allow me to create dots on my panel. So you can see there's little tiny dots. I'm clearly moving the mouse a little bit more, but I can draw dots on the screen if I wanted to. Next, I'm going to talk about the mouse dragged method. The mouse dragged method is going to say, okay, wherever you are moving the mouse, set the current shape's X position to be that position, that particular X and Y. So as I drag the mouse, I'm setting the X and Y position of the current shape object to be wherever the mouse position is on the screen. Once I release the mouse, that's when it gets added to the shape object, to the shape array list, I mean. All right, so I check to see, make certain that the current shape isn't null. Hopefully it's not. And I say, okay, set wherever I release the mouse, that's the end of my line in this case. It could be the end of my rectangle. It could be the end of my oval. And then I add that shape to the list. I set current shape to be null, and I tell the object to repaint. Where does repaint do? Repaint goes back up and says, you better call this paint component. So again, I'm going through my list, and if I just drew a line, I now have one object in my shape, a single line, in my shapes array list, a single line. I get that object and I draw it. There is currently nothing in shape draw since I'm not in the process of drawing any objects on the screen, so this isn't going to happen. But every time I repaint, I want to draw every single object in my array list. Okay? So again, mouse pressed starts the drawing process. Mouse dragged says, here's your current shape. This is where you're currently ending it, so that I could see it as it's being drawn. And mouse released says, okay, take that shape that you just drew, add it to the array list, and then repaint the screen with all of the objects that are currently drawn on it. Now, the last one that I'm going to show you here is the draw frame. The draw frame is going to extend the JFrame class. I set the width and the height of it and declared some buttons, the color shape, the color shape box, which is a combo box, whether or not the object is filled. And I created a panel in which to hold all of those objects called the selection panel. So what I'm talking about now is this set up at the top of the screen here, which does the undo, the black, which all of the colors in it, the line, whether or not it's filled, or to clear and undo the screen. Now, in this particular example, I haven't implemented any of these. The only thing that I'm drawing is a black line on the screen. I can't change it, right? The only thing that I can do right now is draw a line. Okay. So you can see that what I did was I created some shapes to draw and, the strings for them, as well as the colors. Later on, I would have a JText field to represent the coordinates, which could just, in theory, be a label. And I have a graphics panel. So you'll notice that I have declared two panels. I have a selection panel, which is that panel at the top of the screen, this one, north. And then I have the graphics panel, which is the white screen on which I draw my shapes. In my constructor, I've created two methods, one to create the selection panel, one to create the graphics panel. The selection panel, all it does, creates selection panel, it instantiates the buttons, creates the combo boxes, creates the filled box, and adds all of those elements to the selection panel. I then take the selection panel and I say add it to the north. Remember, a JFrame by default has a layout manager of a border layout. Okay. In my create graphics panel now, all I'm doing is I'm instantiating the panel and I'm saying draw that panel in the center. Okay. Now you're going to see that I'm going to have some private classes here. The private classes are going to implement action listeners for the buttons. So this is the undo button listener and this is the clear button listener. You could put them all into one button listener if you so chose. It doesn't really matter. All right, I have an item listener for the colors box handler, and I have an item listener for the shapes box handler. Again, this was just an option that I followed to kind of show you something else that you could have individual listeners for each option, for each component. My personal preference is probably to put it into a single listener. So I would have maybe two subclasses in here, an action listener and an item listener. All right, I have more things for the checkbox handler, etc. And then all I do is instantiate a draw frame. So what that does is, again, when I run this, I create this panel up top and the panel in the middle, excuse me, which allows me to draw my lines on the screen. You're going to have to implement the item listeners that are going to do the black, blue, cyan, etc. You're going to have to implement the line, oval, and the rectangle, the filled checkbox, the undo, and the clear. All right, you can implement them any way you want. I don't care. You don't have to follow this specific framework that I'm talking about here. What I am talking about is that you had to use the shape class. That was the framework that I really wanted you to follow. And I wanted you to implement the draw method so that you were forced to use polymorphism. Okay? Other than that, you should hopefully be able to take this idea now and expand it so that you have the oval, the rectangle, etc. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me.